and I am delighted to welcome you this noon. It's a sunny day here in Hartford, Connecticut. I hope the folks that are joining us from throughout the Pioneer Valley, here in the state of Connecticut, around New York and beyond, are also comfortable. Just a couple of notes of welcome. You know that we reopened the museum to public visitation back on Labor Day weekend, and it's been really heartening to see people come out. The museum continues to be a safe place to visit. You'll see that everyone here wears one of these when they're at work or they're in the galleries. We've got advanced cleaning and all the other kinds of things. We've got enough airflow to outpace the state mandated standards by a factor of 9. So people are coming out, and I want to encourage you to continue to come out. Some of you may have seen our ad in the New York Times museum supplement last month. It is great art, closer than you think. And today we're going to talk about one of the great works of art, one of the great relationships that we're featuring in our series of icon presentations, a series of kind of masterpiece works of art, but telling the human stories around them. And so I'm totally happy to be part of the introductions and welcomes today. Our hours right now are Fridays, noon to 8. We've got a lot of people coming in the evenings, so you might want to think about coming after work or after school. And we're open Saturday, Sunday, noon to 5. We're free for everybody. We're going to stay being free for everybody through the holiday. When that changes, look for our website for updates. You can register to come, and that helps us with the contact tracing in advance of your visit, or you can just show up and we'll get you registered when you come. Today, our program is celebrating a fabulous work of art, by an artist whose work I've always admired, but I've gotten to know a lot better. A work of art which the artist's daughter, who's an artist in her own right, is going to talk with us about today. She bought it on the open market and then gave it to us 2 years ago. Wow. It's a fabulous work of art. It's called I Love My Baby. And in some ways, there's an optimism about this object that was countercultural to where a lot of art making in Boho, New York was in the wake of World War II. And so for those of you who saw my comments at the annual meeting, that was all heartfelt. It's a move towards progress. It's a reinvestment in the belief in us as humans to get things right, as opposed to us to just mess the world up. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation between Mimi and Patty to talk a little bit more about that object. And as experts, I'm just a generalist. The show will at least be up until March 21st. I hope we might have an opportunity to extend it just a little bit longer, because I know that we have a limited opportunity for people to visit right now. And last, I want to tell you that the Wadsworth continues to want to be your place for art on Main Street. We're here doing our best to matter more and to matter to more people all the time. A great resource that allows us to do that is the close and warm relationship we've had with the Joseph and Robert Cornell Foundation, which established a memorial fund, which allows for educational programs like today's to come off in their full funded way. So with that, I turn it over to Patty Hickson. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Patty Hickson. I'm the Emily Hall Tremaine Curator of Contemporary Art here at the Wadsworth Atheneum. And I think I'd like to start by quickly thanking Mimi Gross and Sasha Davis and Brittany Cassandra of the Kayam and Rini Gross Foundation for their support of this exhibition, and they made some key loans, which you will see in the upcoming presentation. And now let me introduce Mimi, who will be in discussion with me today. Mimi Gross is a painter, installation artist, as well as a set and costume designer. She grew up in New York City and attended the High School for Music. The High School for Music and Art, now LaGuardia High School, and then Bard College. She also trained with the artist Oskar Kokoschka in Salzburg. Mimi Gross's work can be found in the collections of the Jewish Museum in New York, the New York Public Library, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, among other collections. She's the recipient of awards and grants, including from the New York State Council for the Arts, the National Endowment for Visual Arts, and the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters. Over her 60-plus year career, which is amazing in itself, she's been featured in innumerable exhibitions, most recently at the Gray Art Gallery at NYU and the BMCC in New York, the Farnsworth Art Museum and Bowdoin College Museum of Art in Maine, at the Atlanta Contemporary in Georgia, and currently at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. We'll be looking at some of these projects today. Her father was Chaim Gross, of course, and he's a celebrated sculptor known for direct carving, especially carving in hardwood. Her family's collection is housed in the Kayam and Rini Gross Foundation on LaGuardia Place in New York, where she serves as president of the board. The format of today's talk will be a conversation about Chaim Gross and his sculpture, I Love My Baby, which is a recent gift to the museum by Mimi. And we'll also look at the Wadsworth exhibition. Then we'll discuss Mimi's work and career and recent projects, and her father's influence on her own work. Please put any questions in the chat box located in the bar at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take questions at the end of our 40 to 45-minute presentation and conversation. Okay, thank you. So let's start with the first slide. Okay, so this is an image of Chaim Gross in an early studio, so on East 9th Street in New York. He was a sculptor. As you can see, he's surrounded by his objects, but especially excelled in direct carving of both wood and stone. And he even wrote the book on the subject, a 1947 publication, which I have right here, The Techniques of Wood Sculpture. And so you think about carving as a subtractive process. So it's about taking away material to reveal the inner object, right? And Chaim seemed to focus largely on circus performers and family groupings. So Mimi, would you talk a little bit about his early life in Europe and how this influenced his becoming a carver and an artist, and his subject matter, basically focusing on family and circus performers?
Well, it's quite a range of questions.
I know there are 3 big questions in there.
I would say that the first question about his childhood and background is that he grew up in the Carpathian Mountains, where I believe, from what he told me, he spent a great deal of time climbing trees and stealing birds' nests and avoiding school. He really didn't go to formal school, because when he was quite little, his family changed and lived in a town, and he never really went to school after that. He came to America when he was 17 after he had studied in Budapest at an art school for a few months, but after a few months there was some kind of counter-revolution, and all aliens were thrown out of the country, so he went back to what was Austro-Hungary. He came to America when he was 17, at which time he started to study at the Educational Alliance at Lower Manhattan. And very early on, he was encouraged to study sculpture because his drawings were so three-dimensional. He told this story that he was studying with John Sloan. I think it was at the Beaux-Arts Institute, and John Sloan saw his drawing of a tree and said, "Why don't you study sculpture? Your work is so dimensional." And he took to it. He loved it right away. His second question about the subject matter, I'd say form was his subject matter. He was interested in making the form as interesting as possible. And he used movement subjects like circus performers or acrobats together or families together with babies. He said it just had a movement within the concept, but then his carving really emphasized the forms, the movement, how the light is attracted on the surface.
Mhm.
What was your other question?
I think and how did, I know that wood was a part of his upbringing. So his father, your grandfather, right, worked in the lumber business.
Yes. Well, I don't know about lumber business, considering that very, very, very poor Jewish family. I think that his job was marking the trees that were to be felled for a paper company, which meant he wandered through the woods.
Mhm. Great. Okay, let's take a closer look at our object with the next slide. So this is I Love My Baby, which was donated to the museum by Mimi last year. And so Tom alluded to how you acquired this work. Could you talk a little bit about that and whose collection it had originally been in? I think it has a great provenance behind it.
Yes, it does. And I do remember that my father considered it one of his major works.
Mhm.
And I remember it really well from my adolescence and childhood. Just always admired it. It belonged to Vera List, who was a student of my father's as well as a philanthropist and collector.
Mhm.
Some of you may know it from RISD, where there's a List Center, and MIT, there's a List Center, same family. Marvelous people who also had a fantastic collection. And she loved Kayam and his work. Unfortunately, the piece, I guess after she died, it went to one of her grandchildren or someone in her family who put it up for auction. And although I really can't afford to go around buying sculpture, I just couldn't believe its availability and its importance, and felt it should find a fine home. And I think the Wadsworth is as fine a home as you can get.
Well, we're so grateful, and yes, thank you for the kudos. It's a wonderful piece, and I think we honor it as well by featuring it in one of these focus gallery exhibitions. And what a story emerged from this sculpture. So let's look at the next slide, and we'll get into it.
It's really hard to see this, that
Mhm.
lignum vitae being the world's hardest wood, and to see the size that it's over 5 feet high. So it's a very, very ambitious carving.
Mhm. And I think, and I think this slide too, we did a slide like this to illustrate that the work is intended to be seen in the round. So we showed different viewpoints of the same sculpture, and so it's really interesting to see how the form, which is the subject matter, right,
Yes,
changes. I mean, it becomes extremely abstract from
yes.
some angles, and then entirely figurative from other angles. But when I talk about it needing to be seen in the round, I think that it really shows up in this work, because even the faces of the mother and the baby are on different planes completely. So it really does drive you around the sculpture.
It just has a very curious dynamic. It's really quite a strange and beautiful piece. The strangeness and the distortion, but the distortion is rather elegant and rhythmic.
Yes, so the distortion in the mother's body, especially, right? It's just
Yes, it's like outreaching somehow.
yeah.
Mimi, I have a quick question. So the difference between seeing it when your dad was making it and soon after, and then seeing it again as a fully realized artist yourself, do you have, how long did you live with it in the house before he let it go? And then, what was that like?
No, it wasn't in our house ever. It was in his studio. And
In
when I
early
was
studio.
when I was around 12, I posed for my father for a portrait, and I went there a great deal and remember it from then. However, in the house now at our foundation, there is a unique bronze cast. But that's a really good question about looking at his work with the perspective of now being 80 years old, because I'd say his work has grown on me, if in a good way, that I've learned to respect how difficult the technique actually is and how curious he was, always trying new things. All of these aspects of his character, I've learned to admire and respect more than I did even when I was younger.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's a really good question, because different years you have a different feeling towards, especially classical things.
Mhm.
Very much so.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide, Jana. Thank you. So this slide depicts the entry into the exhibition as well as how we've presented the sculpture. And Mimi, you pointed out that the lighting on this is much better than in the other photographs, which is wonderful. We obviously have placed it in the center of the gallery space on a round pedestal to really encourage people to walk around it. And, as you can see, lighting is great on it to really show off this rhythm of the surfaces. I think we can go to the next slide now to move things along. So I Love My Baby is presented also with two related drawings, which is really exciting. I want to point out that the sculpture is dated 1948 and the two preliminary drawings in the exhibition are dated 1930 and 1938. So here we have a lag time of almost 20 years between an idea and its making. Mimi, can you talk a little bit about that? Did he often just have sketchbooks that were waiting for the right piece of wood or waiting for the right time that he felt to make the work?
I wish I could really answer this. I just know he always was drawing and he always had ideas. And I'm sure there was a pile of them. In this case, there was a war in between, which must have influenced his work habits. I don't know exactly in this case about the interval of time, except that it really is interesting to have found these drawings. From my point of view, I just love his drawings. He really was a master.
Let's look at the next slide because we have a close-up of the drawing. You can get a better idea of the drawing. So,
yeah, it's uncanny that,
again, and you also said that Kayam went to Europe right before making the sculpture, right? So he had done these drawings in the 30s, and then after the war, he went to Europe in 1947, I think. And,
yes,
and then,
extensive trip.
And then he came back and made this sculpture.
Yes.
I think the timing is really interesting with that.
Well, you had commented on the Madonna theme, but that was there even before. I don't know how to say, except that I know he was very inspired by the trip to Europe. And he went to Israel for the first time in 1947.
Oh, so it was also part of that trip to Europe. Then he went to Israel.
Yes.
And I mean, just look at the drawing. The quality of the line and the rhythm and the dynamism. They're just incredible drawings. He had such a hand.
Especially when you think when they were done, 1930, it just has a tiny element of surrealism in it, in its distortion. But on the right, where you see there's some cross hatching, you can already see he sees the dimensionality of it.
Yeah, and that he draws them from different angles. The smaller drawing on the upper left shows it from a different side. You know.
He did have a way of looking at the wood and visualizing what would come out of it. And his first step would be drawing with chalk on the wood all around. He would have the central, for example, the central drawing that's larger, and then he would do the different sides.
And I should say that part of our focus exhibition at the Wadsworth is that we do have the film from the 1930s, Tree Trunk to Head, which is a black and white film that shows Kayam make a sculpture from start to finish. And it's actually a portrait of Rini, your mom.
My mother.
Yeah. And that film, I think, is just, it shows him drawing the chalk onto this block of wood. So you get the whole process caught on film. It's really wonderful film.
Yeah, the layers of the cutting, starting with larger pieces and refining it.
Oh, and with that said, I should also say that in the exhibition, we have a display case of tools that were borrowed directly from the foundation. So Kayam's tools that were used to make a sculpture. So starting from the heavier chisels to the most refined tools that he used to see a sculpture all the way through its making. Let's look at the next slide, because we need to get to your work too. So a nice discovery that we made with this sculpture was Sasha from the foundation suggested that we look at the base, that oftentimes it will say where the wood was from, because when I start asking questions about an object, of course, Kayam being so interested in different kinds of hardwoods, I wanted to know if we knew where this particular lignum vitae came from. And she said, you should look at the base. Sometimes there's the writing from the lumberyard or from its origin that would be written on there. And lo and behold, product of Cuba is right there on the bottom. So what we're looking at on the left is the base of the self base of the sculpture that's depicted on the right. So it's sitting right on top of that pedestal. And the next slide. Then another great discovery was being at the foundation and being shown this photograph of Kayam at the Monteith Company lumberyard in Lower Manhattan, touching this particular piece of wood. So if you look at this, maybe it's hard to see in the slide, but if you look at the end of the trunk that he's touching, you can see product of Cuba is written on it, as well as a number, 238. And so what he's touching is the exact piece of wood that was used to make our sculpture. And this is a photograph from 1938. So when he made the second drawing, essentially. And so he had this piece of wood for more than 10 years, for 10 years before he actually carved the sculpture. So I think
It needs to
brings a
dry.
lot to the story.
Needs to dry. Also to note the log that's underneath with the black ending is an ebony piece. All of this wood is now prohibited. Can't buy it.
So he really worked with a variety of what they called exotic hardwoods at the time, right? You named a number, something like 70 or 80 different varieties.
He said he worked in over 80 woods, and of course, also marbles, stone.
It's great. And it's a great story, personal story that we can attach to our own sculpture. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, so here I wanted to show, this is the Kayam and Rini Gross Foundation, which was their home, as well as Kayam's studio. And on the third floor is the living room. And in the back on the left, maybe Jana can point it out, is the bronze version of I Love My Baby. So you actually have the bronze version at the foundation.
Yes.
And was it typical of him to take a wood sculpture and, you know,
At first, in the early days, he did cast several wood pieces into bronze, usually unique casts or two casts. But later, when he learned the sort of the fantasy of what bronze could do by welding it together, it really opened up his work, and it changed quite a bit. That was in the 50s.
That's right. That's right. And
I'm just pointing out among the paintings.
yeah, so the collection.
Marvelous still life. It's by Marsden Hartley of Anemones. And next to it, though rather vague in the photo, two heads. It's by Louise Nevelson. When she was quite young, she was student of Chaim's. And above it is an Orozco painting, etc. There are two portraits of me. There's a little round portrait of me as a baby. And then to the left, a little bit difficult to see, there's a portrait of me as a young woman.
And another round.
So round. And then on the further left, there's a wonderful black and white gouache of Reginald Marsh.
Yeah, it's a beautiful big drawing. Yeah, it's lovely. No, it's the
It's
lower.
actually double.
Yeah.
It's on both sides.
Oh, nice.
And then above it, there's a John Graham painting that's rather difficult to see.
But I think what's interesting to point out here is that Chaim was really friends with a lot of artists, and they supported each other. They bought each other's work, or maybe traded or had gifts. And obviously you were painted by some of these prominent artists. So it's really, there was a whole community there as well.
Yes. It was a smaller art world.
Okay, next slide. We're going to take a few more looks at the foundation itself. So when you enter the foundation, you enter this gallery, and you can see it there. The most forward sculpture on the left is a self-portrait of Kayam, and then the next figurative sculpture to that is a portrait of Rini, your mom. So those two greet you right at the entrance, and that Rini sculpture is the one that's featured in the film that's in the exhibition. Is this a changing space, or does it stay pretty?
Changes.
Changes.
It's particularly open in this photograph, and that's because our most recent exhibit that's on the second floor is a Do Touch exhibit for people who are sight impaired. And so this space was opened up as well, so that there wouldn't be any obstacles for walking around. Usually it's a little bit more dense.
Okay, so if you turn around from this picture, we'll look at the next slide. So if you're in the space here and then you turn around, this is what you see, which is a continuation of that landing gallery, and then looking down into the studio, which is just incredible with these glorious windows and all this natural light. Then the next slide. This is the studio itself, which is just, and you can see all the tools lining the back wall on the right.
It was recently restored. The skylight was replaced, and the little rectangular windows were replaced. Huge restoration job. For 50 years, it was needed work.
And so when did the family move into this space?
Something like 63.
Wow. It's just beautiful.
And then, of course, the Soho neighborhood had not started so much, but once it started, my parents' friends and collectors would come down to Soho to see the galleries. And then they'd come by and visit my father in his studio. And that's what ignited the idea to make the foundation as a place for the public.
That's great. It's great. And it's coming around again.
A little bit.
Yeah. And finally, we have an image of the second floor gallery that has the touch exhibition.
Which has all different materials, and so that one can feel wood and stone and bronze and an unfinished piece and a finished piece. And the drawings are at a low level for those who can see but are slightly impaired.
Mm-hmm.
It's been very interesting.
That's great. Have you been reaching out to specific communities?
Oh, yes, and classes have come, and blind classes have come, yes.
That's great. Okay,
Miss
next
Sasha
slide.
could tell you a lot more about it.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Throw it in.
I found this picture. So I should point out that Kayam sketchbooks and archives too have recently been given to the Archives of American Art. Is the
Yes.
archives too? Okay. And some of the archives are already online, and we found this really lovely photo of you and your father in there. And between you and me and Jana, we figured out that it was 1963, looking up various things because of the pin on his lapel, right?
Yeah, I think it's at the Academy of Arts and Letters,
Mm-hmm.
at an exhibit there.
Yeah, it's a great photograph. And this is a great segue to get into your work. So we're going to look at some of the things we're going to talk about your practice and recent shows, and some featuring early work like this one. So can you talk a little
Well,
bit
this
about?
work would be from around the time of that photograph.
Yeah, that's right.
Trying to match it that way.
Mm-hmm. So portraiture has always been a big part of your practice. And
Yes, it has and always will be. It's a way of keeping company.
mm-hmm. And here there's a portrait of Bob Thompson, an artist that we have in the collection here, who was also a friend of yours. Did you meet him in Provincetown or New York?
I met him in the lumber yard in Provincetown.
In the lumber yard. What were
He
you
was trying to pick up my friend who I was with.
Well, it's interesting though, but because that's interesting in itself. But what as a friend, I think you were both great you're both great colorists. Color is just such a big part of his work, and yours is really exuberant color.
Yes, we both loved color. But also Naomi Shore is very interesting. She's the sister of Mira Shore, who's a wonderful artist and writer. And Naomi herself was a great feminist writer who unfortunately died young. And she was a very good friend of mine. She has many, many books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you really seem to capture personality in your portraits. Let's go to the next one okay. So you have a great story about this picture. I love these group portraits. I think you really excel at these multiple figure portraits. And this from the 1960s with all of these interesting fabric patterns, I think is just wonderful. But there's a great story about your neighborhood in this.
Well, this is Little Italy in the West Side. My father's studio was there, and I was working upstairs at the time. And Anthony Quinn came to visit, the actor who was very popular at that time. So before he came to visit, we were strangers in the neighborhood. But after he came to visit, suddenly we were everybody's best friend, Tony this and Tony that. And so the kids would hang around the door. And finally, I asked them to come in and painted them. And they were very nice about that, but I had to separate the girls from the boys to keep it less rowdy. boys were particularly tough, though you can't tell in the painting because they're so young.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what did Janice say? Janice said something about the sharks and the jets in that neighborhood. Okay.
But later I lived on East Grant Street on Mulberry Street, and the people on Mulberry Street would say, watch out for the West Side Italians. But on the West Side, they said, watch out for the East Side Italians. So it was a different time.
Okay, next slide. So this piece, so, you know, up to now, we've just been looking at drawings and paintings. So when did you start venturing into more three-dimensional work? Because something like this rodeo piece,
No, I always
combination
did.
of painting and sculpture.
Yeah, but I always did experiment with dimensional work and did a lot of pieces in paper mache and on cardboard, all kinds of materials. This happens to be painted on reverse on plexiglass and then mounted on wood. And the figures are all over 8 feet tall. It was after going to 24 rodeos in a show in a row, and
Why?
ended up being asked to do a piece for this great American rodeo show that was in Texas.
Oh, so it was research.
It was from research, yes. But
Okay.
recently it was resurrected, just Eric Firestone Gallery resurrected it last year. It was in Chicago Art Fair.
I mean, they're just so, the color and the energy, they're so lively, they feel so contemporary. I mean, this is what we're talking 45 years. You made this work
Cowboys
45
will be
years ago.
cowboys. They're
Yeah,
always
cowboys,
the
they're
same.
cowboys.
Yeah, you can't change cowboys. It was fascinating to spend so much time with them.
And
You know,
rodeo
by the
clowns.
subject matter, the bullpen, that's sort of backstage. So it was a very intimate experience to spend with these guys waiting around to go on the arena.
That's great. So we're going to move from a kind of a fun subject to one that's much more serious. And this work, the Lost Atlanta series, was shown just last year. But these drawings you made almost 40 years ago at the time of the
These unfortunate young people were murdered in Atlanta, serial murderers that were never actually found. And I was overwhelmed by the subject and made these drawings one after another at the time. But they'd been shown only once, in fact, shown for something called Children in Crisis in Washington. And the parents of these children actually saw the drawings at the time. But it was very moving to show it in Atlanta and have teenagers came to see the show who had never actually knew about the story. Recently, this murder story has been reopened because the person accused really was innocent.
Yeah, and it was also
a total tragedy.
Yeah, and in 2020, this year, HBO released a documentary about it.
Yes, I saw it too.
Atlanta's Missing and Murdered, the Lost Children. So, you know, clearly it is something that's starting to be looked at again.
Well, our fingers are crossed for Atlanta next week. In 2 weeks, I guess it is.
That's right. The next slide. Okay, so there's a close-up of one of the drawings and your portfolio. And then the next slide.
We've made a facsimile of this portfolio at Institute 192 in Lexington, Kentucky, printed it. it's available.
Yeah, it's a beautiful catalog. It really is. And the next slide shows where you got your source images for the portraits.
Washington Post.
Washington Post in 1981, because you made these all immediately.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it was Mother's Day. I had them all over the floor.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and tell the Toni Morrison story. There's a great story.
Oh, I don't know. I have a dear friend who was friends with someone who was ghost editing a book for Toni Morrison, who inherited the book from her best friend Bombada, who wrote a novel, or actually a non-fiction novel about these cases. And the young lady saw these drawings and thought they'd make great end papers. And she took the portfolio and showed it to Toni Morrison. And Toni Morrison wrote this really great letter that is what Patty's talking about. And the letter said how much she admired the drawings, but her publisher wanted to have a map, so they were not used. But we put the letter in the show. Why Patty liked the story.
Yeah.
It sits with the portfolio.
Well, and Toni Morrison is just so amazing too. So
the book
really...
was published,
Mm-hmm.
by the way.
I'm going to look it up.
Mm-hmm.
But I did see the documentary. It's just so tragic.
Yes.
Okay, next slide, please. So, monumental pieces like this. Was this made for a specific show, or?
No, it was made when I moved into where I'm still living, and that was that many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I wanted to do a piece that incorporated everything I knew about all different materials. And so it's oil paint, but it's mixed with wood, plexiglass, I don't know what else, linoleum, aluminum, and it's based on the Delacroix painting. And I had friends pose for it, of course. It's called Dark Air, which was a pun on Delacroix. But I can't really do it from here, but there's a light that is above the column on the left that crosses over to what looks like a record in the young man's hand. Mm-hmm. And so that's mirrored and it reflects back on their faces. So the light is like the Delacroix painting, which we had in New York last year. Mm-hmm. It's so great to see it again.
Yeah, it's a great piece. I've seen it. It's in your studio.
Yeah,
your home.
I'm looking at it as we speak.
Okay, next work. And this one's a little hard to see because there's a little noise in the background, other things on the wall, but it's very three-dimensional. It comes out like a stage set in a way. But can you talk a little bit about this classic
I studied Poussin's compositions and later did a large piece about the riot in Tompkins Square using this composition that was all black and blue. And I had read that Poussin made little wooden models using fabric and hair and to figure out the perspective. And I kind of followed that. First, I had a little tiny model, then I made a bigger one in wood, and then I made a big drawing. And then I did this larger installation that was 9 by 9 feet about the part. Mm-hmm. There's a riot over homeless characters at Tompkins Square. Mm-hmm. And I had an essay with it. My friend.
I wish we had a picture of the Tompkins Square piece, but we don't. So let's look at the next piece.
Wow, you
So-
found it.
The scale of this piece, right? It's 10 feet tall by 24 feet long.
No, 14 feet wide, 14.
Okay, 14. Okay. All right. So tell us about this piece.
Well, Arlene Raven was a fantastic art historian who not only taught at MICA for many years, but she's written many books, and she was a great feminist leader. Unfortunately, she has died. She died before the painting was finished. And this group of women, she took to studios, galleries, museums for about, it was the 20th anniversary when I did the painting. And I don't know, I was doing single portraits and double portraits, and then suddenly they came to visit my studio to look at my 9/11 drawings.
Mhm.
And at the time, and when they were there, I said, well, I'll do everybody's portrait. It was one of the most foolish things I ever said. It took years and years to do this portrait. It was very hard to get everyone to pose
Mhm.
more than one. Some of the women posed several times.
Can you talk about the hands?
Oh, yes. It turned out that Jana, who did the exhibition with Patty, was interested in Frangelica. So I told this anecdote that I'd been working on the painting, working on a long time, thought it was finished. And I went to see the Frangelica show at the Met. And oh my goodness, I realized, oops. So I went back and did all the hands, all the gestures.
Yep.
That made it a lot more interesting as a painting. And
Mhm.
that's me in the back looking sideways painting. And
Of
Nancy
course.
Grossman, who was Arlene's partner,
Mhm.
she's one with glasses on the top left.
Mhm. Oh, sure. Right.
One person died, person in the yellow jacket died. And the person with the next to the lady with very white hair, she's sort of ochre hair that's wild. She got divorced. This is in the time of the painting, and Arlene died. So
Mhm.
there's a video of making this painting, because I had to add several inches, and it was an enormous job to sew 14 feet of canvas
Yeah.
onto this.
It's
It's a big,
quite an
also
accomplishment.
working with oil paint, it's so slow.
Mhm. Okay, let's go to the next slide because we are running late.
Oh, this is
so-
very recent.
Mhm.
It's a portrait of a park in Chinatown that is as elderly people who are, once these people are gone, Chinatown will be gone. It's the ending of a neighborhood. And the sculpture in the center is Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and that under the sculpture it says all under heaven are equal. But the seniors, they do exercise, they play cards and chess, and a lot of musicians. And it's my local park.
It's great. And we have a little detail in the next slide, just so you can see that all of these, there's a flat background, but everything comes off.
Yes, it's in matte board. It's
Mhm.
very complicated, actually.
And they're amazing. And now your current project, which is at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum, called The Arrival 1620, which was a commission for the 500th, is that right?
400th.
400th, yes, anniversary. Sorry, I wasn't thinking about my math. I didn't think I'd have to.
400th commemoration of the arrival of pilgrims.
Right, so talk about this. I mean, you were working on it forever, and it was very complicated. These are basically life-size figures, and there are 30 or 40 of them throughout the gallery, but you've also, created a whole
30.
environment.
Mhm. Yes, these are in acrylic on wood, and I was focusing on the Wampanoag people who were living on the Eastern Shore for 20,000 years before the Pilgrims arrived. And so I was fascinated by the idea of the Wampanoag people were doing their chores when this boat arrived. And so I have the prow of the boat with pilgrims barging out of the wall. And unfortunately, my bell is ringing. Yes, it was a very spontaneous concept in terms of when I was asked to do it. I just felt to show how varied and interesting the Wampanoag Nation actually is, as it still exists.
Yeah.
That was my focus.
And we have one more slide, I think, of this work. Yeah, so another point of view for it, but really such an ambitious project. And
Yes,
really,
it will be on through the end of January, but there is a video about it, which anybody could see.
is it on YouTube or Vimeo? Where have you?
A Vimeo, yes.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
And next, and our final slide are these very recent drawings. So,
Yes.
and are these done out of your imagination or outside?
Oh, no, I was in Connecticut very recently, and they're from visiting my friends in their beautiful garden in Connecticut. So they're very recent, yes.
Mm-hmm. So like your father, you're always drawing. I see you with your sketchbook at all times.
Yes, he was inspiring that way.
Mm-hmm. So where do you find that, I mean, in kind of conclusion, where do you find you and your father's work intersects and other like major influences on you from his practice?
Well, for one thing, I'm very, very proud of the fact that we made the foundation, showing his work and perpetuating his legacy, which I think he was a major sculptor and want people to see it, know it. I always felt like I was, from his wine cup, the chip off the old shoulder or whatever you want to call it, and appropriate for Hanukkah that starts tonight. I just feel that he inspired me a great deal and also inspired the sense of curiosity for always doing better and seeing the world and sharing the world. There's so many things I could say that if you asked me next week, I'd have a different answer. Mm-hmm. But thank you for doing this program. I think it's wonderful to share it, and for many people who can see it this way who won't be able to go to the Athenaeum.
Mm-hmm. Let me see if we can take maybe just one or two questions, because there are a lot of questions, but not a lot of time, because we really try to keep this to just 1 hour. So let me
see the thank yous flashing. Susan Fisher is our former director of our foundation. She was saying thank you.
Oh, let's see. Can you say something about, can we talk about how the wood, someone asked if we can talk about how the wood was finished, but maybe you can speak to how Kayam really honored the natural beauty of the wood. And
yes, remember we were going to show, I don't know if you can see me because I can't see me, but I was going to show this piece that's also a lignum vitae, and it shows the natural color of the wood,
which is two-tone. It's really interesting.
I can't tell if you can see the whole thing. Yeah, it's a marvelous piece, but it shows the natural. He never changed the natural color. He would stain it and then scrape the stain back. Not stain it, seal it.
Right.
would seal the wood and then basically rub that in.
Mhm. So can you
It
tell
was
us
never colored.
another question is, where's the foundation located? Can you give the address?
It's 526 LaGuardia Place, the northwest, just north of the northwest corner of Bleecker Street and LaGuardia Place. And LaGuardia Place is same street as Fifth Avenue or West Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
It's
And
near the West 4th Street subway and the Bleecker Street subway.
but you currently you're not open currently, so people should keep checking the website to see if
Yes,
when you
there's
have
a
hours.
virtual tour on the website.
Yes, and it's also linked to the Wadsworth's exhibition page for this project. So
Right.
if you'd like to have a virtual tour of the foundation, it's a great thing.
That's great.
A quick question, did Kayam's Jewish background influence his work?
Much later in his life,
Mhm.
he did go to Israel over 50 times. He was very Zionistic about Israel at first, though he became quite discouraged later in his life. But he had at least one exhibit of watercolors of Israel at the Jewish Museum in the late 50s or
Mhm.
mid 50s. And as a subject matter, as he became older, yes, he was very inspired by the Hasidim of his childhood memories, as well as he did illustrations for the book of Isaiah that was published. It's a very beautiful book. It was part of his life, yes.
Thank you for that. And someone wanted to know who designed the studio, because it is such a beautiful architectural design.
He did work with a mid-century architect who never showed up. So essentially, he designed it,
Amazing.
as well as the other floors and the details.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful place.
It was a raw loft building with a hole through it that had a hand-pulled elevator with a rope that you went up and down without any protection.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, he designed it.
And finally, someone asked how you decided to donate this particular sculpture to the Wadsworth.
Well, I met Patty and we just got to know each other, and I had just gotten the sculpture. And I really have admired Athenaeum for so long. I'm a big fan of the Ballet Russe collection and the Calders. And basically the museum itself, it's a gem. And that was how I picked it.
Well,
it was a debate. The debate was the Art Institute of Chicago. So you won the prize in the debate.
Thank goodness.
You didn't know that, did you?
No, I just learned that just now. So thank you so much. I think that's a really good point to end on. And
but also there was strengthened by Tom's interest in sculpture. Mm-hmm. When he came to see it, it was supportive. It wasn't like, oh, well, he really did like it. And I thought that was a huge support too.
Yeah, and I do, well, look, we're doing a focus exhibition on it. I think that, we clearly we're very interested in the object itself too. And, really happy with the story that emerged and the kind of support materials that we found around it. So I thank you for that and this wonderful gift. And any parting words, Mimi?
No, I just hope people will enjoy going there when they're in the area.
And if anyone gets to Cape Cod before the end of January, please go see Mimi's.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The Provincetown Art Association.
Check out the Vimeo if you can't get there, please.
Yes, the arrival. So, okay, thanks everyone for attending. And it's been great fun, Mimi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patty. Yeah, it's great to see you.
It's great to see you too.